yogis, William and Quinn,
Aloha, everyone. Good to see
Debbie
you.
and Mary,
Yeah,
Susan,
Fred, Tracy,
Tracy,
Susan.
Sally,
Gonna read everybody's name.
Bruce, Kay. Yeah, not to mention all the countries.
Wow. Suddenly, Susan, Bill, hi, Andrew, Jim, Kristen, hey, Jim. Ah, wow. Wow.
Uh-oh.
What's wrong?
Oh, just a little Facebook live stream didn't work yet. Let's see. I'll try that again.
It's amazing how suddenly we're all here together. It's how does that happen? Kind of satellite. Wow. Wow.
We weave a quilt once a week.
Right. Quilt. Yogi quilt. Okay. Great. Wow. Sometimes I think, oh, maybe everybody's going to be busy today, but no, it's great. I love seeing everybody. Ah. Wow, Ava. Wow, Ava. Where's Ava? Wow. This is so great. Okay.
All set, Jesse?
Yeah, I think we're good to go. Aloha, everybody. All right, I'll mute myself.
Okay. What are we here for? Can you feel your breath? What does it feel like when breath breathes itself? And its innate oneness with body. How does the body feel? How is it feeling now? What's the experience of the body? Breath and the body are the same and they're different. And how about feeling tone? The body pleasant, feeling tone, painful, feeling tone, or like a lot of us, some places pleasant, some places painful, feeling tone in the body. And the heart, mind. Stream of thoughts and mental images and those deeper oceanic swells, mental formations. neutral feeling tone, pleasant, unpleasant, moving around. And does it all fit together? This breath, this body, this feeling, tones, elements of mind. Did you notice color, sound, fragrance, flavor? Tactile sensations, textures of the body. Just in the noticing with this tool, this quality, this sati, awareness at a special pitch that's only attuned to now, to the experience happening right now. The mindfulness of sati can't be mindful of what's past already, nor of what has not yet arisen. It's a relief in a way to know that there's no struggle to go forward or backward. This abiding in the moment with the felt sense, experiential felt sense of this breath, this body, these physical and mental elements that are already here, already in the present, already following their own nature. If the mind, body, activities have been busy, call up the mantra of slow down, slow way down. Deeply relax. Slowing down makes us more heedful, more careful, more aware, easier to continue abiding here and now in the present. There's no need to look for anything in particular, like holding the soft eyes, soft gaze, so that we're just barely aware of objects, more of color and form, sound, vibration, and actual experiential textures, temperatures, vibrations. Taking care to continue slowing down, continue developing that appamada, heedfulness, carefulness. So, though there's no need to look for anything in particular, we have our home anchor. I find it helpful to refamiliarize awareness, to sync it with the anchor. Sometimes it's the rising, falling of the abdomen, the feeling the changing contours, movements, sensations, propelling, staccato vibrations, pressures. In the rising or in breath. And the variations of the release of pressure, loosening, falling, relaxing with the out breath. Or if I use the body as an anchor, sometimes it's a global awareness, as if, like when you have a sip of warm water or tea or a favorite beverage in the evening, and it just seems to immediately go to every part of the body, every cell, just for a moment, feels that nurturing warmth. So that global way of holding the body anchor. As well, sometimes yogis find it helpful to touch in with the hands, feet, sit bones. So a gentle wash of awareness from the head down through the body. It's more like one of Mahasi Sayadaw's meditation practices to completely focus on the dhatu elements as they've been described. Various temperatures and vibrations, textures, movement, heat, cool, tingling, pushing, pulling, stretching. No need to label those. It's like challenging ourselves to walk across a familiar room in the dark. We kind of know where things are, so we won't get hurt falling down steps. But we use all our senses to attune and feel our way through the darkness. And suddenly it's as if light goes on in the mind and the heart. And we feel familiar, connected, at home, in place, sense of place, right here in this body with its 5 physical senses. and consciousness, the heart. See if this is true for yourself. in the last part of our meditation together. If you've been feeling and sensing, experiencing the elemental nature, either as form is physical nature, elements, color, sound, fragrance, flavor, and tactile sensation of the body. It's called rupa dhatu, rupa form, dhatu element. Or when we turn the awareness onto arupa dhatu, formless elements of the mind, the thinking process, mental formations, mental imagery, consciousness itself, the knowing mind itself. We can add a metta element. We can add a caring, compassion element in viewing the element of form of the body and the formless nature of thoughts and mental phenomena. The friendliness element or the caring element, the empathetic joy element, and the evenness, the equipoise element. Do you notice any shift in how the experience is felt and known of the form elements, the rupa elements, or the formless elements, the non-material phenomena of heart, emotions, thoughts? That spirit of exploration. How does metta affect this observing awareness of form and formless elemental nature? All of our Vipassana practice, all of the Brahma Viharas lend us, lead us, carry us toward a third element. It's not characterized by form, that felt sense experience of the body and the senses, and it's not of the nature of the heart or mind, the formless element. This third element, the Buddha called the coolness element, or nibbana dhatu. The Buddha called it also the quenching dhatu, the quenching element, or nirodha dhatu. The fire has gone out, the floods have been crossed, the heart is liberated. The bell with no sound. You have to unmute, Michele. Bell with sound. The sound dhatu.
Thank you, Steve. We have to get you a bell. We have like 100 bells over here, and now you're just up the road.
Right.
Uh, hmm. Michele had to give a talk yesterday, so we're giving her a break today, and but she'll take the lead on questions if folks have some at the end. Um, I think I've mentioned a few times, and people are familiar, to some degree or other with Vipassana Hawaii and our work, and um, some of a story of our responsibility around some land here on the Big Island, and that's a more long, amazing, ongoing story. But I wanted to share a little snippet of recent happenings. Um, Part of the land that the organization owns, it's almost a mile of coastline up on the northern part of the island, and it's just, it is incredible land and very powerful, very sacred, very quiet, very pristine, and it's been an ongoing. It's like such gift and such incredible, unbelievable good karma that we have this relationship with this land, and it's also very intense. It's also a lot of work, a lot of responsibility, and it's for an organization our size that really we don't really have the money to maintain it, to protect it, to kind of make whatever improvements might be appropriate there. And so we try to care for it as best we can in the many ways that we try. And one of the hardships is that it is a long stretch. It's in a sort of remote area, and we have spent a lot of time and lawyers' fees over the bunch of years at this point, trying to fix a grant of easement access for the public, so that, because we want it to be available and used, and to have a trail and to have fishermen be able to come use it, and have it be part of like the local culture in a way that's healthy, that also respects the land and the historical aspects of it and the sacred aspects of it. So we've put a lot of energy into sort of securing and stabilizing this public access that's still not finished. But we got a call last week from a young man who wanted to have a big group of people out there this weekend, to to do slacklining. I don't know if probably folks who, I didn't know what that was. It's basically like a tightrope that they wanted to walk across. And I'm gonna share my screen for a second. Let's see. And so this is the picture. This little photo here is where they wanted to put this line, like across this bay. It's like a 200 yard line that they wanted to do, and then walk across it. There's probably better pictures I can find somewhere, but so, you know, we're not set up for that. Our insurance definitely doesn't cover that. And there's it was just a very interesting thing where I was like, there was a few days where it really felt like maybe we could work it out because of the public access. Perhaps the state has liability and maybe they had their own and waivers. And anyway, it turned out that it wasn't going to work. And our lawyer was like pretty clear about it. And so we had to tell them that they couldn't do it. And they basically ignored us and went ahead and did it anyway. And because of all this, Michele and I were teaching a day, you know, yesterday, we couldn't get out there. Couldn't kind of like intervene in a way that felt was gonna work. But it was a very powerful and very tense and kind of interesting dynamic, you know, of just this place that we care so much about, that we have so little control over in so many ways. And the feeling of kind of being taken advantage of being really lied to on various levels and dishonesty. And then even when we were sort of hoping that maybe something could work, there were certain rules that we were going to lay down, you know, no camping, no cars driving on the cliffs. It's like very fragile ecosystem for nesting birds. It's a conservation zone. You're just not allowed to do that. Anyway, they did all of these things, right? Drilled pins into the stones and COVID time, you know, to have this huge gathering out there. And part of it is also just not wanting wanting that land to be quiet and wanting to protect it actually for people who are fishing and people who are OPE picking and people who are, you know, using it in a way that's a little bit more in alignment with not just our vision, but the sort of, you know, community's vision of how we share space and use it. And so this, like the emotional, and you know, in our tradition, there are people who practice walking on air, you know, that are Sayadaw Lakana at the end of the Chazwa retreat for a bunch of years, he would always tell us, he would get into this whole story, and this is in Burma and Upper Burma, of like how, you know, Jesus, he knows, he has read about how Jesus, you know, walked on water, and from the Theravada perspective, there's like a very clear way of how to do that, like how to train yourself to do that. And essentially it takes a lot of concentration. And the idea is you focus on, you get a little kind of, you know, circle and you put some dirt there and you focus on the earth element, you know, and you do this to such a degree that it's kind of like you know, in high temperatures, molecules, you know, the laws of physics change, right? It's like under high concentration, the relationship between mind and matter has the capacity to be very different, you know, and so you can become so absorbed in earth element that you see it everywhere, and that you're able to relate to all things as earth element, so that you could sort of walk on air, you know, or walk on water, or if you saw everything as air element, you could walk through walls, or, you know, you can read about it. And it's not generally encouraged even in our own tradition. You know, there are people that are still supposedly kind of practicing that. You go to Burma, you'll definitely, you know, last couple of years ago, I went to a village with another Sayadaw, and, you know, there are stories of a monk who passed away a few years ago, who used to fly to get his lunch and then fly back, you know, just like on, you know, on the air element or whatever maybe he was doing his earth element, walking on the air. So there are stories. It's part of the sort of lived tradition of, you know, that if you have like all the time in the world to practice and a certain aptitude, that there might be some benefit to getting that concentrated, though you're not really necessarily building wisdom up, you know. So it's not that we don't have some appreciation for walking on air, for getting a different perspective. But I think what was hard was like his attitude that like we're all doing the same thing. Like we're walking on this tightrope across the bay and we're trying to like, you know, get stoked and just like have this incredible like altered experience. And that's what you guys are doing. And so we're doing like the same thing, you know, in this sort of different way. And it's it's just so clear that we're not doing that. You know, that we appreciate that there is a value in the practice of getting a different perspective on things, right? That actually just this sort of like our perspective of mind and matter, of who we are, of relationships to the world, is very tight and very fixed, and there is a reality to that. Some of what Steve was saying about these sort of different dhatus, and like there's a reality to mind and matter, and there are other aspects to reality. There's other ways of relating to those, of understanding them, experiencing them, that and that breaking out of that actually can give us some perspective to kind of unhook and become unattached. But there's always this very clear warning about just like that we're not doing it just to get high. You know, we're not doing it just for the ecstatic experience, just to escape. That while we sometimes we do need some pleasant experience, you know, that the practice will provide some refuge and some relief and some respite and release from some of the churnings of our own mind, the churnings of our body, the churnings of the world around us. But that it's not really an escape from, ultimately, that we might use those kind of places of refuge to build up the capacity to keep going in, to keep getting unattached, more and more caring, and have this sort of open-heartedness to a broader range of experience. And that, and how sober that is, and how hard it is actually to be that sober in life, you know. um, you know, because I think that's often the criticism of spiritual practice, and is this like, oh, you're not actually dealing with the pain in the world, you're trying to escape. And it's interesting that it's like from the inside of the tradition there's this like it's not that, it's not one or the other, right? We're not trying to drown in the sorrow and the suffering of the world, but we're also not just trying to escape by getting high and sort of like um, trying to get peak experience all the time, right? We get a little bit of space, we get a little bit of distance, we go through the hardship. The idea is ultimately to be able to see that there are highs and lows that are going to come out of our control, right? We're also not deadening life through the practice. We're not trying to make everything just neutral. We couldn't, that wouldn't be possible. You know, there's still going to be pleasant, there's still going to be unpleasant, gain, loss, praise, blame, status, and disrepute, right? These things are still going to arise and pass out of our control. Where is the freedom? And in this practice, it's by not being attached, not needing to always be high. And how actually really hard that is. You know, that like that there's a way one could say that as a kind of judgmental critique of the many ways. You know, most people here, as far as I know, are not doing slackline, and not that there's anything like immoral about doing slackline. It's like you could do slackline and be a good yogi, right? But it's like the sense of like we're all doing some version of that. It's like there is a very powerful impulse to like that place between trying to give ourselves a little bit of buoyancy and sort of wholesome pleasure to be able to manage the grueling nature of reality and be in there without getting stuck, without drowning. How do we cross the flood, you know, through this practice, through going through it, not by flying over, not necessarily by slacklining over, but like actually going through it, and how hard that is. But how hard it is also to then know that we do need to incorporate some rest and relief and pleasure and joy, in order to make us feel like we're capable of actually going through the slog of it at times. I read a great little essay recently, by a woman named Liesel Schwab, and I'm just going to read a little excerpt from it. The essay is about mostly her relationship with her son and how hard it's been because of his addiction, chemical addiction struggles, throughout his life, and this sort of the slog of going to so many meetings, right? Like family meetings with strangers and anonymous groups to just go through it over and over, and how hard it can be. But she said here, after him being in a facility for a couple months, uh, the next Thursday we were back with different parents and different kids in the same basement, having the same conversation. One night, a red-haired young man with freckles on his arms and paint on his pants was muttering as if he didn't mean to talk out loud. "Being sober sucks," he said. Watching his mother from across the room, I felt in my solar plexus the despair in her face. "How can you say that?" she said. She pleaded. "I'm not saying things aren't better," he explained, "but it still sucks." Had my son said the same thing, I would have crumpled in rage or defeat. Watching the bluntness of another family's exchange, I saw these two people in a way I wasn't sure I'd ever seen anyone. I saw that they were both scared. I saw they were both being honest. I saw that it wasn't anyone's fault. They both looked dejected, but for the first time I understood that while bearing witness to someone else's pain might not change our own, it provided perspective I couldn't have otherwise grasped. In this case, it was the raw admission that being sober, the very reason we were all in that basement to begin with, was harder and more grueling than any of us wanted to admit, and that no matter how much she loved her kid, this other mom couldn't do anything to change that. I think that there's something so powerful and humble and true about, well, what this kid said, and that this writer was sort of open and receptive enough to really hear it in a powerful way, of just how hard it is to not want to get high all the time, or to not just get angry all the time. I think that's like to understand that we're going to be tuned differently, all of us. That there's some of us are going to be really tuned to trying to just sort of seek pleasure all the time. Some of us are going to find the solidity and strength in being aversive all the time and angry or sad or overwhelmed. Some of us will find our security in delusion and confusion, in fantasy, in whatever ways that might look. We all have all of that. But to really, I think that honest look at ourselves is so important. And not just in the general sense, like not just like right now, where it's like, do you want to be free, or do you just want things to be the way you want them to be? That question is so important always, and it could be just something we ask ourselves literally like every 5 minutes, or more, or every moment. It would take longer to say that in our minds than to how often we actually need to reflect on that. This question of because it's not just in general. It's not just like, oh, we're sitting here and it's a Sunday sitting, and of course we want to be free. Of course, like that's like baseline, for us all here. But in the midst of a moment of wanting, or in the midst of a moment of frustration, um, what do we really want? And so for me, thinking about this kid, yesterday we're teaching this day long online, and it's sort of like in the back of my head, this like, oh, he's out there slacklining, this this kid, and all these kids and whatever, it makes me feel like this grumpy old man. And then to just like having to be like sitting and teaching myself, right? I was just like, do I want to be free, or do I just want things to be the way I want them to be? And it's like, and not just do I want them the way I want them to be, which is maybe more the grasping side. Where is it that I am addicted to the aversion? Right? Where is it that I just, there's something stabilizing, reassuring, feels strong in being angry? right? And being upset. And why, as soon as I'm like, okay, whatever, let it go, and then it comes back. Or even the sense of like really being like, there's nothing I can do at this point, and really feeling okay about it, really feeling settled, or I'm gonna do this, or whatever way we might feel settled in a moment, to then in the next moment it arises again, right? And so for all of us, it's like this sense of what are the things right now. I think we're all very sensitive and very easily triggered into these patterns of emotional response to the world, uh, to whether it's whatever's happening with COVID, what's happening with the election, what's happening with um, whatever, social movements right now, and race relations, and there's like, and then all the normal stuff is still happening, right? Then you're like, oh, global warming is like still totally happening. People are still starving across the planet. It's just like not on the news, right? So it's like there's an endless amount of things for the mind to sort of like really be genuinely and reasonably and rationally upset about. And where is that place of like, oh, do I want to be free or do I want to be angry? And where do we take some responsibility for that in the moment? And to be very careful about like not just saying, it's not just a choice. It's not like we can just decide to not be angry. But if we see that, when we see those patterns arising of like, oh, just wanting satisfaction or wanting fulfillment of some kind, or wanting this or the not wanting, the contraction, the anger, the rage, whatever of that sort of in that spectrum might arise, is there a place where we do sort of take seriously our commitment to our path and our practice, and this question of, do I want to be feeling this way? Do and that there are a million, of course, tricks that we might try to implement in that. It's like the sense of like, well, does our anger actually help? Does it does being mad about this harm the person we're mad about? Does it do anything to actually change the dynamic? There might be a range of answers to that. There might be a sense that actually our indignation galvanizes, right, as part of a galvanizing effort outside of us, and that there's a value to that socially. But the question of like, right now, in this moment, to get sensitive to the pain of wanting, the pain of anger and of hatred, and that it actually, for whatever, however rational it might be, however legitimate it might be, we're the ones actually suffering in this. And to be sensitive enough to feel like, well, what am I getting out of this? And to be honest about what actually feels good about being angry right now. What is it that might feel like me and solid and strong, and where's the energy in that? What is it that feels good about the fantasy of getting what we want, right? Like, where is the and again, it's a solidifying meanness that arises often out of that grasping towards something, and that willingness to stop and see it. You don't need to make it stop. You don't need to convince yourself not to be angry. We don't need to convince ourselves not to want. It's not about that. It's not happening at that level of kind of like dialectic, right? It's like, no, the awareness can be okay with the wanting. It can be okay with the anger. There can be a tenderness of it, of like, oh, this is painful. This really hurts. And then this kind of exploration and settling in, and where can the system sort of start to settle and feel like we're not totally beholden to these impulses, and that there might be actually something more satisfying, like Steve was saying, this dhatu, the quenching dhatu of nibbana, of cessation, nirodha. Oh, is there any place where it's like actually the relief of not being angry, of letting anger go, the relief of wanting, the relief of letting wanting go, right? It's like, oh, where do we taste the beautiful quality of that, the relief of that in the heart? Where does that start to get this sort of generative, um, it's almost like the opposite of a dialectic, where it's like the love and the non-attachment, right? Those play off each other in a way that actually is unbinding, and that the energy that comes from that is more of like a fission rather than a fusion, rather than the kind of combustion of anger and aversion and attachment. it's this sort of like the letting go, the release, the the quenching, the openness, the relief that comes from the heart that is bolstered by love, or bolstered by non-attachment, by acceptance, by peace. That provides a very different and ultimately more powerful and more stable energy. And a very beautiful feeling in the heart and mind, of relief that the Buddha talked about and promised. But I think this question of like, maybe in the big picture we want it, but where are we in the moment to moment, just the small irritations, the places where we're just a little irritated, the place where we have little wanting, right? Or we just want the world to be better, or we really wish something, we wish harm upon someone, right? It's like, where do we sort of take responsibility for these things that might not fit so easily into like what we think of as greed or hatred, but you're like, well, this is justifiable, or of course we want the world to be a certain way and not another. Where do we start to see those attachments also as part of wanting, and take responsibility for the tension in the heart that they create, and the lack of satisfaction of those, the suffering that creates, and where we might find release and relief from that. I'll just offer a little poem from a nun. This is in the time of the Buddha. The Therigatha is a collection of poems and sort of enlightenment verses from different nuns at the time of the Buddha. That's collected as part of the canon. This is a poem of Sisupachala, a nun who has this interaction with Mara, a common occurrence back then, and I think still now. I mean, sometimes it might be fun to just like, really, it's like if you're not going to identify with the wanting or the ignorance or the aversion, in a playful way, we can externalize it. We can say, oh, Mara, I see you. The nun filled with virtues, with the ways we know the world well controlled, attains the state of peace, sublime and sweet. And Mara speaks up. There are gods in the Tavatimsa heaven, Yama gods, and also ones in the Tusita realm, gods who create their own pleasures, gods who enjoy what others create. Turn your mind to the pleasures of those places that you once enjoyed. He means like in a past life. And Sisupachala replies, there are still gods in the Tavatimsa heaven, Yama gods, and also ones in the Tusita realm, gods who create their own pleasures and gods who enjoy what others create. But all of them, but all of them, time and again, life after life, in whatever body they come to be, never get beyond embodiment. They just run after more birth and death. The whole world is in flames. The whole world is burning. The whole world is blazing. The whole world is shaking. The Buddha taught the Dhamma that cannot be shaken. It has no equal and is not known by ordinary people. But I have fixed the mind on it. After I heard what he said, I lived delighting in his teaching. I have seen with my own eyes the three things that most don't know. What the Buddha taught is done. What you take as pleasures are not for me. The mass of mental darkness is split open. Know this, evil one. You are defeated. You are finished. And so I just, we offer a way of practice and a way of, living this life that is trying to understand the value of caring for the world and our compassion for suffering and the appreciation of joy in the world and the acceptance of things as they are. And so to know that it is harder to allow for the love and to allow for the caring and the connection and the beautiful qualities of relationship with each other, with ourselves, with the world. It's harder to do that and let go and be released and not and to seek pleasure from outside of that dynamic of pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, gain and loss, all of these things. It's very hard to find the Dhamma that cannot be shaken. It has no equal and is not known to ordinary people, but I have fixed my mind on it. And that question of like every day we encounter these things, we encounter challenges in our lives and challenges in the world, and the vicissitudes of course are bound to shake. The world is on fire, the world is burning, the world is blazing, the whole world is shaking. We can do our best to try to help, soothe, to care for, to mend, to revolutionize, but the nature of the world is always to be burning, to shake, to tremble. And to what degree in our daily lives are we keeping our attention focused on the unbound, on the unshakable, on the peace that is outside of these fluctuations? And where do we find refuge in them? Because it's accessible, because it's available to us, because it often just takes a subtle shift of stepping back, of looking at what's happening and re-aiming the attention, re-aiming the mind, and taking responsibility for that. It's not always that simple. It doesn't mean it's persistent. We don't have that many people fully enlightened right now. It's not easy. But we do believe that actually the most pure and powerful way is to do this through caring with the balance of love and the balance of affection and compassion and connection to the world, that purifies the challenges of attachment and of aversion, and our process towards equanimity and seeing that stability is strengthened and softened, and the suppleness of mind through our love, through our care. But it's not an easy path. And the conditions in many of our lives right now are not always totally supportive of it. But to just know that every little irritation, every little wanting is a place where we can look at and see where are we recommitting to samsara, and where are we recommitting to liberation. And to know that there are a lot of little holes, a lot of little pukas in our daily life where we can intervene, or we can stop the flow of things just getting more and more angry or more addicted. That we have that ability, and that's the point of this practice. So just encourage all of you to, as much as possible, to take these as opportunities to get free and not create more shackles for ourselves. So we do have some time, as usual, for questions. Um, if you, it, it should be that if you go click on the little button at the bottom of your screen that says participants, a little thing will open up on the right, and you should have a button maybe where it says more somewhere. You have the ability to raise your hand by clicking on something, and we'll see that you have a question. If that's not working, you can send me a chat, and I'll call on you. You don't have to ask the whole question in the chat, but I'll just make sure I'll see you and make sure that you get called on. So yeah, if anyone has a question, you can raise your digital hand, and Michele will start to take the lead. But they can be about anything, about the talk, about your practice, about Steve's instructions, whatever would be supportive. Kathy, are you there?
I
Hi.
I I have a general update. A few weeks ago, I shared that I was having some difficulties with my roommate, and there was a lot of anger and fear. And I'm really happy to report that the relationship has improved dramatically. Um, and yeah, it really, like, it feels like a world of difference. And I think like this practice has helped me so much through the last few weeks, and so I'm just really grateful. And more of a comment about my practice. So I did a lot of sitting today, and I found that now I'm getting to a point where I struggle with pain a lot when I sit. And I'm getting to a point where I can sort of like, the pain can be very intense, but there can also be, there's like a felt sense of like peace and ease in the presence of the pain. Like the pain is still there, but and that lasts for a while. And then like at some point, I'm like, I can't do this, it's too much. And then like I change my posture and I say, I can't do it anymore. And then I take a break, and then when I feel better, I go back to it. Like, do you have any like comments about hearing that, or any suggestions?
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
I think first of all, congratulations on what happened with your roommate. That will often give us a lot of confidence, or some confidence in our ability to sustain the attention through something difficult. I think that it's so important because the question about the physical pain is similar in a way, in that, how do we connect and sustain the attention through pain, whether it's inner or outer? And so I think that congratulations on that, because I think it's a very important experience to even remember when we have another challenge like that, that it is possible, to get through it. So, great. And then with the physical pain, I think you're doing it just right, that that you sustain your attention with it as long as you can. We teach that there's a certain point where you're reinforcing aversion to something. It's one thing to find an awareness that's okay with the pain, or you find the peace outside of it and you're able to be with it. And that's, again, something to remember and also have confidence in, and know that that's like a muscle that can stretch, that you're stretching a muscle. In any kind of understanding we have of physical exercise, you don't stretch it to the point where you hurt it and it can't recover. So you don't want to push it to the point where you never want to sit again, or you can't sit again for 6 months. So I think you're doing really well. I think it's very hard to find that peaceful awareness in relationship to disliking something or aversion, rather than physical pain. And you can see just the way my hands are moving, like when you're with physical pain, the awareness is coming often to any place in the body. But when disliking happens, it's kind of slippery, right? Or you're like that mild irritation, or that when you hit, I can't be with this anymore for another second. That is built up. That usually doesn't just happen, right? So what we recommend is often actually not necessarily even waiting to that point, so that you start to be able to know that it's wise. It's a wise action or right action to move before you hit the point of helplessness or hopelessness. You know what I mean? That you would. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Do you know that point?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Because that, I gotta say, it took me forever to understand this. I would like push it and push it and push it, you know, and I'd be sweating and my teeth would be clenched and I'd just be like trying to power through the pain, willpower. And I wasn't seeing that I was just getting more aversion to the aversion, not even to the pain, but I was having aversion to aversion. And I just, um, I would get so defeated. I would feel defeated. So I would recommend not pushing to that point. And so, you know, we can recommend trying all these ways to, you know, investigate the physical sensations and move our attention around the sensation so you're not in it, and to go to sound, or, you know what I mean, do some compassion, and you do all those things. And then if you hit that point where like, actually, it might be better if I stand up right now. The most important thing is that the motivation. What we're trying to do is reinforce a motivation of compassion and wisdom rather than aversion. So rather than just stand up out of aversion, you would stand up out of compassion and wisdom, and not weakness, but out of reinforcing strength. So it's strong to know when it's wise to move. I see that you're getting it. Do you have any questions about that, or?
No, I think I'm
Good.
good.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think they're very connected. I think the outer is often connected to the inner. So I'm glad that you brought them both up in one question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I might just add, just a, not add really, but pull out from what Michele said, just that one thing to look at a lot of times, especially when you feel like you are sort of successfully with pain in a okay way for a little while, is starting to just, it's really just that last piece of like really understanding, is it the pain, the physical pain that's hard, or whatever is happening emotionally that's actually hard? And often we'll find that it's actually something emotional that's more difficult around, that's in response to the pain, and the pain itself isn't actually that, it can be often more manageable, and that the emotional part is difficult, not just because it's difficult, but because we keep looking at the pain as we think the thing that's hard. But if you just, by averting the attention toward the whatever sort of emotional things that might be coming up in relationship to it, often that can sort of de-escalate the intensity and might sort of give you a little more time and sort of sense of space to explore it. Yeah. Tracy, you there?
Hi.
Hi there.
Thank you. I appreciate the reminder about the little things, because I ride my bike and I find myself just, I can get just so angry with people. And I've started just saying, like, noticing that and reminding myself I feel vulnerable. And that helps, because especially I can't quite get to compassion sometimes, or even for the other people. It's more like I feel vulnerable with being outside, and how some people are moving through space around me. So, and along those lines is an experience I had with my practice, the formal practice today, that I wanted just to share, and I would love to hear what you guys think about it. So I started walking. I was doing walking meditation, and just really aware of, there's just been a lot of fear and anxiety, and just my heart just going, so it felt like going so fast. And I was aware of that. I walked for 10 or 15 minutes, and then I sat and put hands to my heart. And there was just a lot of like really hating things and compassion for that, and just lots and lots of tears. And then the heart, the rapidness of the heart felt like it just released and felt calm. And then it sort of switched to more like Vipassana practice. And I noticed tension in the jaw. And then hearing the beating of the heart. That's what it felt like. It felt like hearing here. And then like the visual of where there's normally seeing along with that of the heart, like where I think the pound, the heart's beating, that was gone. I've had those kind of experiences before, but it was interesting, like the legs, there's still visual of the legs, and it was all fine. But after the sit, I just felt sort of curious about it. Like, it almost felt like a protection. Like it was kind of the combo. There's this tension and almost like a protection of that. I don't know. Yeah, so I'm just curious about it, and if you have any thoughts on that.
I have one little question, which is, what do you mean at the end you felt, what did you feel like was a protection?
It just felt interesting to have been so aware of like this intensity around the heart, and then it was like, it was gone. But only visually. It was a little disconcerting, I guess.
I think it's what, because I know your practice so well.
Yeah.
I'm laughing, and I hope people understand. I'm not laughing without a meaning to it, so just bear with me. But it's when things disappear conceptually or visually, which we're encouraging people to experience that level of dimension of reality. It doesn't necessarily mean that afterwards we might not feel like it's like the little me or the little self will come back to trying to feel more protected by appearing conceptually again.
Yeah.
It's when you let go of the conceptual world, it's hard to understand, like what you're saying. You can see it makes sense, but when you're going through it, it's kind of like two different worlds, and it's hard to bridge it conceptually.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I hear you trying to do, is trying to bridge that conceptually. And it takes so much trust, that even like when Steve mentioned and Jesse mentioned that the release of that, letting that little self go, right? The vulnerability, the anxiety is our little self trying to protect itself from the vulnerability. And when you just stayed with it, and it disappeared. It's wonderful when it disappears, but when you kind of move out of that space, often there's a way that we try to understand it that is disconcerting sometimes. You don't sound that disconcerted, but I'm trying to try to offer a way to understand it.
It's very helpful, because in the sit, when it was happening, it felt like there was a lot of mindfulness and samadhi, and it didn't feel Yeah, it was just, it was like you're saying, like afterwards trying to somehow make sense or rehearse it or something.
And then, you know, I mean, I think what I always find is there's a bittersweet quality to that, because we get usually attached to that, but we also, it's hard to maintain it. And so that the price of having that little me come back is that it doesn't feel as good necessarily.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's great. I'm glad.
Thank
Happy,
you.
happy, happy. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I just this I would want to say something about just there is something amazing about when you're seeing things clearly, you sometimes realize you're not sure what you're seeing. And that's, you know, it makes sense on some level, you know, and that when something disappears that was like so intense, this question of like, oh, am I just, is it a protection? Is there delusion at play? Is there an avoidance of it? Or has it disappeared? And then the response of doubt to that, it just to like, it's just important to just keep track of that process of like feeling like very mindful, feeling there was intense experience, seeing it disappear, not sure what happened, confusion, doubt, and like just like that's a little formula there that's like worth noting, you know, and kind of like seeing where that might be a way that we relate to insight, or you know, it's like, oh, where do we trust it and where do we have doubt and where is that just part of the process? And anyway, all of that, it's great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cynthia Calvert, there we go.
Yep.
Hi.
Hi. So I have sort of a two-part question, and I'm not exactly sure how to formulate it. After the last 10-day retreat, well, I felt really disappointed and somewhat discouraged because my concentration and mindfulness were not as strong as they had been at retreats in the past. And some of that is, I think, I talked to Steve and stuff, Michele, about it, my aging brain. And so part of what that meant is that I didn't get high like I would sometimes get high at the end of a retreat. And I'm an old recovering drug addict, but I like that. And so part of my question is, in a way, what I experience as that high feels, I mean, I can see how you could call it escape, but what it feels like, it's more like a little taste of freedom. And I can see more clearly, and I actually feel more grounded and more open-hearted. And so A, is that just a delusion? And B, I remember Steve talking about how, you know, we don't meditate to get to a state of mind, we meditate to end craving. And it's not like I'm going to stop practicing, because what else am I going to do? But if my concentration and mindfulness aren't as great, am I going to be able to get closer to that state of stopping craving? So yeah, so those are my sort of two questions.
You know, am I on? You know, I think it's so brave to ask this question, because it's, I also know that you went through a fire during that retreat and you had to evacuate. You know, that's also kind of distracting. It's not like you got the protection that would enable that kind of deeper equanimity to be as appear because you weren't as protected. So just to remember, that was toward the end of the retreat. You had to actually go leave your house, pack up, and go to a different place. So just I think it's important to remember that the conditions for your practice weren't as conducive to that deeper equanimity. And I would say that that's really important to remember, that deep equanimity is not a high. It's a it's freedom. And freedom, what you would experience similarly is that the Buddha called it the one great attachment. Like you can get really attached to that, which will feel similar to be attached to high.
Yeah.
And that's what I would encourage you to explore, that we all have to do over and over, is that it's so, I don't think there's anything more painful than when you kind of fall out of that grace. It's like, feels like you're falling from grace when the deep equanimity is there, because the understanding is so clear that when aversion comes, you see it just as aversion and you don't bite. Or if a wanting comes up and you don't bite, it feels wonderful. But it's not the high of being attached to pleasure.
Right.
And so I would just really, I think you really get this, and I'm only reinforcing it, that wanting is wanting, unfortunately. Whether we're wanting like nibbana or, or deep equanimity, or wanting a chocolate, it's the same thing. That's the hard part. But the Buddha did call this deep equanimity the one great attachment, and to understand why. It's like, to be fully enlightened would be to be free in that way. And you get, when you drop into these spaces, you get why you're doing it. And if it's not as accessible, of course it's harder. And I think when most people get older, it gets less accessible unless you get more protection to practice. That's the hard part. It's like that the price of getting older is that you have less energy. And so the less energy, I remember recently I was in Burma just this January, and I was talking with a dear old friend, Sayadaw, there, and I was telling him that I was going to be sitting a month soon, and that I find it harder as I'm getting older to get as quiet and concentrated, and my body hurts more. I was joking with him about it, and he said, well, the body's just going to hurt more and more and more, but your mind, you can like be free with that. Like, it's okay. Your mind can get old and tired, but you can actually be okay with all that. Right.
Right.
And that's what, it was great, but of course he's 11 years younger than me, so it's like, I'm kind of waiting till he hits my age, if I ever see him again, and see what he has to say. But it's you really have to, I try to still practice in a way to play to my strength. And so as an older yogi, I give myself more breaks in a day, but I still try to have some time where I have more energy and I practice. And so I'm trying to play to the aging process and not have as high an expectation.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of grateful for any moment of clarity. You know what I mean? It's just different. But I really want to remind you that fire blasted you to smithereens,
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Thank you.
great. Yeah.
Denise, are you there?
Hello.
Hi.
Funny, whenever I work up the nerve to ask a question, I listen to it always seems the Dharma talk or other people's questions are always so tied in. I'm like, yeah. What I've been working with, I would say the last 6 months since the last retreat in December is, actually, let me backtrack. I'm going to try to make this concise. What brought me into the practice after a really difficult practice with a different tradition was practicing mudita, metta, karuna, like those three. Equanimity, I was like, yeah, whatever, that will come. I've since embraced that more, but that was a back burner before. Like it was these warm heart practices that brought me into the practice. And so that's what I was kind of comfortable with, working with love and joy and compassion for over the years myself and then other people. But what I found in the last 6 months, so just before COVID hit and then has intensified, is a real block to that. Not conceptually. Conceptually, I feel very connected. I mean, I feel connected when I'm waiting to go in the butcher and we're all waiting in line, are 2 meters apart in the heat, but I'm filled with such gratitude and joy because I get to, we talk, and then I know there's food at the end of the line. So there's a lot of gratitude, like I feel that. But it's like those moments, ironically, I never thought like standing in line would be the moments that I get these snippets of feeling compassion, connection, gratitude. But it's really, mostly it's on the conceptual. So when I go to do a more of a formal practice, I find there's a real block with that. And I realize part of it is I'm frustrated because I'm feeling I shouldn't be in the conceptual, because for the last 15 years, it's been, I've had such a felt sense, and now I'm like, where did it go? So I think I'm answering my question. I can see it, but how I've been trying to work with it is using is coming from a place of equanimity and going, okay, this is how it is. And that's been kind of what I'm working, and not forcing myself in formal practice to practice those. But I guess this is where maybe I'm grasping. I miss it. I don't know why I'm teary. I think it's just it was just such beauty and joy when I had those, even when it was painful. Like sometimes, working with other people, I work with people who are struggling a lot, and I feel like I can only offer them conceptual, not I think I'm being a bit hard on myself. I know it's not quite that, but anyways, I'm just trying to figure out, because there's all of this, and I have awareness that there's grasping here, and I have an awareness, that I've been working on it, but I guess right now I'm just frustrated, like, well, hurry up and come. So I can hear myself as I speak. But it's also, as I sit down for the formal practice, then I'm finding I'm just like hands off. I go to equanimity practice and Vipassana, but the other three, I just, intellectually I want to practice, but there's just a full, no, it's not happening when I'm on the cushion in a formal way. But I was just wondering if you had any other ideas in addition to kind of what I've been working with, trying to be patient and kind of playing around with that. I wrote it down because I'm always nervous speaking in front of groups. So I think it's a frustration and maybe impatience that's arising. Is that fair?
Yeah. Steve, I know I'm answering a lot. Do you want to say anything, or?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think when you just got teary, what happened? You said you were hard on yourself, but that felt like some water came.
Yes. I'm a
Right.
watery kind of person. I've got a lot of water element.
Right. And so I think that you're missing the water. It's gotten dry.
Yeah.
It's gotten dry.
Yeah.
And I think that you can't force anything, but it's to be sometimes by just saying it and then hearing yourself go, I think I'm too hard on myself, right? I felt like that was the most important part of your question, that
Mm-hmm.
it's like the impatience is probably making it more dry, right?
Yeah.
Like the being hard on yourself is making it more dry. And you can see I'm kind of, that energy will, it feels like this kind of claw coming down and making it worse. And you know, I could, I could easily say, oh, try to be mindful of impatience.
Yeah.
But to try to care about the impatience and be mindful of it, that's great. But I also feel like just to be careful right now of pushing the formal too much.
Mm.
And maybe if you do, where do you live?
Toronto, Canada.
And
Ontario.
and yeah, and then do you have any access to nature?
Oh yes, every day. It's my
Okay,
sanctuary.
yeah, so like maybe sit formally outside.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's what I would recommend, to sit formally outside. And like I have a different stuffed animal for each Brahma Vihara.
Yes.
I'm
love
not
that.
kidding. And
No, I know that. Yeah.
equanimity is really cool. Equanimity is kind of serious little bear. And then, you know, the other three are kind of whimsical, and Mudita's like really fun. And it's like they're like, I would have fun with this more than make it too serious. Like you might get a stuffed animal for each Brahma Vihara and, you know, have the equanimity out front, but just kind of have these other ones kind of in the side and make it a little more watery
Yeah. Yeah.
in whatever way you can, but without the expectation of too much water. But your heart is probably protecting itself. I mean, generally this is what happens. It's like it kind of closes for a while. It could be there's something coming up that needs some space and just patience. Often that's what's happening. Or there's something outer that's too much, and just your system. Ultimately, I trust this stuff more than anything. It's like if
Yeah.
there's a protection happening, it's not that I don't get impatient, but I've lived through this so many years of like the times when it gets dry. It's like, and then the tendency to just be so hard on myself versus oh, relax, take it easy,
Mm-hmm.
shift things a bit, and try to keep remembering that it's almost like when you say grateful at the butcher line, but grateful for the protection.
Yeah.
If you're grateful for this protection, your system will trust you.
Mm.
It's a matter of trusting your system to be the one in charge and not have the impatience be in charge. Because if you know, this reminds me of I have 3 feral cats, but if you try to make them do anything, I mean, much more intense than a little human child, but a feral cat, if you try to make it do something you want, forget it, right? Like, and it's so helpful a teaching for me to see like they're so afraid, but also they just, it doesn't matter what I want. They're never
Mm-hmm.
going to do it, right? Like, and the same with your heart, that your heart, you're saying, I want you to be this way, but your system's going, well, no, I actually feel like I need to protect you right now.
Yeah. I definitely feel it's a protection because
Yeah,
I think for a lot of us, there's a lot of demands.
right. It's hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a really hard time for a lot of us, yeah. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just, and it's just understanding that it's okay. You know, there's so much emphasis on the heart opening, and we always, you know, Steve and Jesse and I are always wanting to remind people, you know, the heart closing is okay.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't. We shouldn't force it to stay open. It's not fair.
It's kind of funny because at first I was probably taking a little bit more of that approach, but then I did notice in the
Yeah.
last little while, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I've been patient 6 months. On my timeline, I mean, I realize how silly that is, but I'm just
No, but
saying, like,
right. No,
I'm like,
and
okay, it's been 6 months, hurry up already. Okay, I'll
it's
try that.
okay to be impatient. That's what I mean by mindful of impatience.
Yes,
It's
yes.
okay to be impatient. You might be impatient for a while. you'll get a better relationship with impatience.
I think so.
Yeah, it's great. Great.
Thank you, Michele.
Yeah, yeah.
I think, you know, we're always going to basically just try to have people, encourage people to not have a big agenda with their practice and go in a skillful way with what's happening. I would say that perhaps when it feels right, when it feels like you're not digging, the question of your impatience and finding the pain of where is there, you know, just like where is the pain in that, and where is the pain in wanting to feel this caring and not being able to, the pressure of that might not be built up enough really, but that at some point it could be an entry point into a sense of tenderness for yourself, right? Like a sense of like, oh, the compassion toward your own hardship of like the longing of wanting to feel this warmth, wanting the water, wanting whatever, you know, like that wanting is painful for sure. And and so there might be some place where that pain is your experience pain, and the recognition of it and the relationship with it could be an entry point into some, you know, a little bit of caring for yourself, your well-being.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesse.
Zoe, you there?
Yes, thank you.
Hi.
Hi. So I have a couple of questions. One is related to aversion and reading the headlines, and the other is, I think it sort of got touched on a bit earlier, just that it's been really hard for me the last few weeks to focus at all when I sit. I mean, my mind is just thinking or off, and even I got an email about an in-person camping retreat that sort of falls between the weekend retreat coming up, online retreat, and the 10-day online retreat that I'm signed up for. And I just don't even have the energy to, I mean, it might be just way too hot to do it anyway, where it is. But I noticed I didn't have the energy, like, oh, I could do this and just make, you know, sort of this large retreat. I just don't have the mental, emotional, and I think I should. But so if you have any suggestions, you know, just, well, in terms of that should, and then also just on a daily level, how to work with, you know, mind that just is off, is the first question.
We might not have time. We might not have time to do too much, because there's one more question after you, and I just want to make sure that we get to it. So maybe let's stick with that question, and then we'll go to the next and see if there's time for another.
Okay.
Are you having any doubt?
Well, when I'm trying to sit, mostly it's just that my mind just doesn't settle and it goes off and thinks about stuff, or it just sort of like blocks. It just, you know, can be with the breath for like a millisecond. You know,
I guess, you know, I think what I'm hearing, you know, from you, but you've mentioned other people have mentioned it, but for example, if you're reading the news, then you're going to be more upset lately. I mean, it's just like, it's like conditions. If, you know, honestly, it's like, it only takes one or two headlines, right? It's not like it takes a lot of effort, right? It's like, it's just, you know, it's like crazy. And so I think just to mention again, if you have a psychotic president and it gets more, you know, what are we going to be feeling? Like joy all the time? Right. No, but I'm saying the effect of that on our meditation is going to be like, if you're not going to be with the anxiety or whatever, you know, you're going to be with the mind wandering. It's like conditions. And it's like, I'm going to be a little strong, but it's more just to remind everybody that of course the attention's wandering more. That's how it's protecting us, right?
That's why it was easier during the 10-day online retreat, because I wasn't reading the paper during those 10 days.
Yes, you answered the question, right? No, but really it's like, it's lowering the expectation around how your day-to-day meditations are, to the degree that you're letting this information in. And that's okay. Like that's the price. It's really a matter of regulating. Everybody has to regulate. And if you're not regulating enough, you're gonna get into the need for almost constant thinking. And that's okay. I'm not saying one way or the other it's better or worse. This is where you understand conditions.
Yeah. And it's not that I'm always thinking about politics or
No,
anything.
no. I'm not even saying that's not what I mean. The mind will wander to protect itself from feeling the pain of it. What I mean by regulating is regulating how much you can deal with the pain in the heart in response to the information. And if you're sensitive like you are, you're overstimulating it to the point where you're just going to have to think more. I'm not saying you're thinking about what you're reading. I'm saying you're just thinking more. It's fine. And I'm just saying fine. Just like lower your expectation.
Okay.
And I would recommend that for everybody who's not completely protecting yourself in the next 3 months. It's like you're going to have to deal with more thinking about other stuff as a protection. And then when you're out, like if there is walking meditation or going for a walk, just bring your attention to the bottom of your feet and then seeing. Bring your attention to the bottom of your feet and hearing. Do metta for the trees, the birds, everyone needs to remember that the Buddha recommended unshakability. Unshakability. And every time you look at this stuff, if you care about it, it's going to shake you. And it's like to know that it requires the karma of this time for all of us is to not let this get to us to the point where it hurts us too much. It's like we've got to stay. It's Thich Nhat Hanh's boat and the ocean with the refugees in the boat. And it's like we've got to hold this we've got to hold it for everybody. That's if you're a spiritual person, this is our spiritual karma. We've got to help everyone stay calm enough to get through this. This is our challenge. And it's not an easy karma. I had a different idea about what our old age was going to look like. I certainly had a different picture. Not what I was hoping for.
I might just offer as an alternative, like as another sort of realm of possibility, is that what you're seeing is like the true nature of the mind. That like even if all the news was great and everything was perfect, the mind would still be an almost totally incoherent flood of just nonsense and just like flood of fabrication. And there's some level of like when we practice, we want to find some familiar experience of ourselves in affirmation of what we think we've been doing all this time doing, and all these things. It's like, well, we've been putting our time in, we should have, there's some expectation of that. And there's another level of like maybe, the approach is going to be basically the same as what Michele is saying, which is like, don't worry about it. Like maybe you're actually just, this is how the mind is. The mind is just as undependable as everything else, every other phenomena. It's just as dependent upon conditions. The physics and math at work are the same. It is not coherent, solid, and controllable. And so that actually unhooking from the need for the mind to be one way or another and allowing it to actually be less coherent, less solid, less steady, might allow the attention to fall into that. The unshakability is not in what we think it is. The unshakability is not in this sort of like me at the center of the room feeling solid. The unshakability is actually below the mind as you recognize it. And you might not need the mind to be behaving in one way or another to have that sense of peace.
great. Yeah.
Thank you for
Mm.
that. And then the last piece of that question, is it okay? I mean, is more retreat better, or it's okay to just, be with a week in between, and then the 10-day and not do a live retreat just because it's a good opportunity that I should want to do, or and ordinarily probably would want to do.
I
But
think we were going to try to just take the first part of your question because we
I
only
thought
have
it was
time for one more, right? Is that right?
Yeah,
I
I
don't,
think
I'm
so.
trying to, yeah.
I
But
thought it was the one question versus the Trump
Well,
and
we'll
news.
just, I think the answer is ultimately, we all have a sense of what rhythm and pacing of like intensive practice is supportive of us. And there's not like a fixed answer. I think if your intuition is to feel like just cramming it all is too much, that might be true, especially 3 different retreats and 3 different formats. Pacing it can often be a wiser approach. Yeah. Or jumping in, doing it all can be a wiser approach. So good luck. Let's see, Mary and Debbie.
Yeah, thank you. It's just Mary's question.
Oh, okay.
But it does say Mary and Debbie.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my question kind of relates, many of what's been asked and shared relates, but there's just something coming through that I kicked the heck out of my bed frame 2 weeks ago and have been tending it, and, it was, seeing all this. I mean, I feel like I've heard pieces of all of your Dharma talks coming through me over the past 2 weeks, and seeing the control of just like, I don't want my toe to be hurting. I want to be walking. It's like, I need walking to really help ground myself. I haven't been able to walk. It's like, swelling, it's this, it's that. And so finally, was it today, yesterday, I, heard my body just say, something's going on here because it's not getting any better. So I think your willing it to not hurt is not going to make it. So I went to, a doctor today. Well, and so COVID actually was relating to it. It's like, I didn't want to go to some facility. It's like, that didn't feel safe. But anyway, I did, get an x-ray today, and and this just, I don't know, there's something about this. It's like, it's the tiniest fracture on my tiniest toe that hurts like bloody hell. And this is what I'm supposed to wear. Like this huge, like every time you say protection, it's like, this is like the protection that's needed for this tiny, teeny little fracture that I could hardly, the doctor said, do you see that? Do you see that? I'm like, no, I don't see it, but I get it. My toe's broken. So I was like, on one hand, I'm like getting this, like, how could this tiny fracture, like, hurt so much, like just that relationship in the body of something so tiny. And then there was something about in Jesse's talk, and I know I've heard Stephen, well, all of you talk about, just like the power also. So like the negativity was in there about the pain that that tiny fracture causes. And then during Jesse's Dharma talk, what came in was like, and there's also this relationship between these tiny acts of kindness, these tiny acts of love that can help bring the ease to the, massive pain in the world. And, Stephen, I'm not going to be able in this moment to quote what you've said many times, something around U Pandita sharing, the one conscious breath, or just is revolutionary, So anyway, I just would love to hear anything that you have to say to help me in this continued journey of healing this tiny fracture with this huge protection.
Have you done walking meditation yet in your new boot?
No, I haven't, because I just got the boot right before this. So I have not, I didn't know if that was why. I mean, is that,
I think that'd be hilarious. And to practice wearing it.
practice what?
Practice as you're wearing your boot.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, one thing that I did feel was this amazing protection. Like, for these 2 weeks, I've been walking like very, like scared to death I was going to hit my toe again. And yes, it was just like, oh, my little toe just like so happy right now.
Yeah, nothing's going to hurt your whole leg. No one will come near you.
It's I think that it's such a good metaphor. I gotta say, I think you're really getting like that. How which foot is it? Your right or left?
It's my left.
Ah, yeah. So I would say it's kind of like your feminine side is needing to slow down and be protected. And the grounding, like you're needing the grounding, the protection. Your body's forcing you,
Yep.
and that's not always easy. I think it's a very hard thing, you know. People can say, "Oh, it's a little fracture in your toe," but actually, not being able to walk is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the metaphor again is going to be a very powerful journey for you in terms of it's like that is a big reminder,
Mm-hmm.
right,
Mm-hmm.
of how you need to protect your grounding.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I see it as, you know.
And I think you said it, Mary, just like to recognize how the almost invisible fracture in the smallest part of your toe, the smallest toe, can really be totally consuming, right? And to really where that you can acknowledge that as like legitimate, right? The pain and the worry and the difficult, like all the levels to which it can be so consuming, and then if you just take that and you know how many billion people are on the planet right now, I don't even know what we're at, 10 15 billion something billion, lots of people, and how many of these wounds we have, how many of them are physical, how many of them are much deeper, you know, wounds in the heart and the mind from generations and eons, and that how totally consumed the world is in suffering and legitimately, and how hard it is to actually see clearly through it and to find compassion through it and to find any peace in that, and the way that it both like it help it just like this is it totally why the world is the way it is, and that it's a miracle that it's actually this functional and this kind, and this people are still like actually able to, you know, have so much compassion and generosity and, you know, with one another in the midst of so much hardship. And you know that like it is such a powerful, it's almost metaphor isn't quite the word, right? Because it's real, it's happening to you, and that there's this sense that it's such actually a profound truth about the nature of all of us and all of us together, and how patient and careful and how much protection we need, and how we're all doing our best without that protection, without the care, without, you know, with actually a lot of forces that are not supportive, and how much compassion we need for one another and for ourselves, and how much care we need to take with each other. So I just, you know, it's really powerful, really powerful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm.
You're having to wear that reminds me of how I have to practice now, because most of my left side is numb most of the time.
Wow.
So I delight in your opportunity to practice in a different way.
Mm.
And as Michele said, and feeling the metaphor of protection
Mm-hmm.
as you wear it, and so appreciating it
Mm-hmm.
for its value.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that being around Steve, he's so mindful. He has to be so mindful walking, or he hurts himself, and it's like very inspiring.
Mm. Mm. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Mm.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Or
Beautiful
evening
to be here.
Yeah.
Good luck out there. Good luck in there. We'll hopefully see you soon. Yeah. Mm.
That was a good one.
Mm.
Bye. Ava. Woo! So good to see everybody. Yeah.